Sketchbook number 10. So this one covers from June 2022 to April 2023. And as always, they take a little while to put together these sketchbooks because I'm often away doing other things and commissions and things like that, being a full-time illustrator. And it always seems that every sketchbook that I fill takes a little bit longer than the last one. But really what I wanted to do with this is, you know, I'd been looking back through past sketchbooks and I'd really wanted to sort of change things, not necessarily change the style, because I was really happy with the sort of pens that I was using, the approach, the travels that I've been on. So it wasn't a case of completely changing everything, but I did mention at the end of Sketchbook 9 that I wanted to really sort of loosen up the style, I think, a little bit. And that was partly due to two reasons. One, I realised that the sketches were taking quite a long time, an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes more than 2 hours to put together. And it's really nice, especially when you're abroad in a nice destination, to actually put together more than one sketchbook in an afternoon, because it can be quite exhausting sometimes, especially if you're sat or stood in one particular spot for all that time. Mentally it's quite exhausting. So and the second reason was I was looking through a lot of Instagram accounts and lots of fantastic people that I follow on Instagram. Lots of other creative types, Jenny Adams, Ronky Ponk, and Phil Dean as well, the Shoreditch sketcher. And they have a really nice, loose, quick approach that makes the sketching more vibrant. So if I just delve into this, so how I really wanted to approach it in the beginning and thought would be a great idea, but eventually I sort of abandoned, was actually take a different approach by drawing friends of mine, really just to get them to pose, because I'm a huge fan of Hockney's work, David Hockney, and I wanted to see if I could replicate that kind of style within the Posca pens. So the first couple of pages of the new sketchbook are really, you know, spending time at friends' houses over the weekend, going back to London because I live on the southeast coast now, and get back to London occasionally. But then sort of drifting back into old ways by colouring up a page beforehand before heading out. So these were sort of Ramsgate, where I live now, as I say, on the southeast coast. And we're coming up to the summer of last year, and we had a particularly hot, really hot summer. So there was lots of people out and about, lots of people come down for the weekend from London or various other places. And this is a really great way of just documenting on a single page and just having some fun. You know, people walking around, sat down, taking in some sun, sat outside a pub, on the beach, reading, looking at their phones, just relaxing basically. This one was from a photo, because from the beginning I'd kind of abandoned the idea of someone posing, because I like to have someone sit quite still for even if it's a short space of time. And to be honest, it wasn't really working for me. The whole sort of quickness and the vibrancy that I wanted in this fresh sketchbook wasn't really working out. So that's my friend Ed there, and he was very patient with me to sit out in the back garden when I visited their place, Ed and Nikki's place, back in May last year. And this is Nikki with Phaedra. But this one was from a photograph, so I could get the sort of likeness in there. And again, just it was a different approach, still using Posca pens, but sort of very. I wanted it to be very sharp with the composition. So I realised after that point, and again, these were sort of working from photos of my friend Jim back in London, that it wasn't really working. It was a nice experiment, but I think it was time to move on. So that's where we sort of ended up through sort of page 4 or 5 of the sketchbook, is back in Ramsgate, and just to really have fun with the colour combinations. And I think that's what it's about sometimes. It's going through a process of you know, working through things, realising that certain ideas or certain things aren't going to work, and essentially that's what sketchbooks are. That's what they do, and that was another thing that was really interesting about past sketchbooks. I was getting quite particular, in fact very particular, about the people and places that I was sketching. So the whole intention really was to loosen up. So I went back to what I was particularly good at and felt comfortable with. But I think what had changed, or what I wanted to change that I didn't realise at the time, were the background colours, and loosening up a little bit of the line work as well. So these ones are Ramsgate. This is just down the road from me. And I love the difference in between the sort of old Victorian house here with some building work going on, and then the sort of council estate at the back there. And this with a whole solid green, but then green over the top as well. So again, it's only a light experiment. It's nothing sort of too experimental, but it's just something a little bit different from what I would usually try to do. So this one is outside a particular pub in Ramsgate, mid-afternoon, approaching the weekend, very sunny. The blue part here is actually painted up before I left the house. So I have a big sort of watercolour brush approach. And sometimes I do that and still do that with past sketchbooks, and will do it in the future, because I think it really helps in terms of, I don't have a particular composition in mind when I put these blocks of colour together before I leave the house. They're just really interesting and get you thinking about how a composition could be once you go to a particular spot. So that was the only basis. So I got to the pub and had a quick drink, sat outside, and then with the rest of the pens that I have, that I'll talk about in a second, really started to put this composition together through different pens. So I'm still using the Posca ones, as you can see here. They're sort of very detailed, and then we're moving on to slightly thicker ones, which are actually these pens called One for All. Again, just going through different illustrators and creatives and designers and artists that I follow on Instagram, and looking at what they're using. And to buy a couple of them and to see if they work for me, you know, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And also the Liquitex pens as well. So these are acrylic based. These are really thick marker pens. And these ones I use, as we'll go through the sketchbook, I'll show you a couple more examples. But these ones, the thicker ones, they're acrylic ones. They're very similar to Posca. They have exactly the same approach, but I quite like the sort of edge of these. You can really sort of scrub on the sort of surface of the page. And that's creating these sort of elements here. So you can cover a big space in a very quick space of time. And these ones just of people sat in and around on the beach, around on the coast in Ramsgate. Again, just having some fun, not really thinking about the composition in particular. This guy in particular was quite funny. He was sat opposite me. He realised what I was doing and just sort of kept moving his position every couple of seconds, whether he was doing that consciously just to try and put me off sketching him. I'm not sure, but sometimes people do strange things when they realise you're being sketched or being watched, like in that sort of way. This was a busker, so this was kind of part photo, real life. I haven't seen him since, actually. He's quite rare in the town, in the centre of Ramsgate. And we have buskers and people that play music on a regular basis, but I've only seen him once. So I sort of started this. I started drawing and then sort of took a couple of photos and then finished off a couple of details back at the house later on that day. But it was really interesting that I think this was the first one where it's sort of coupled with its two elements. It's sort of the initial kind of basis of the sketch, or the sort of black line work that you see, is from life, and he would sit in that pose for a very long time. So that really sort of played to my strengths, just to get the basic composition down and play around with a couple of the colours and the background where the other guitar lay on the wall, and then just went home and thought, how can I make this more interesting, and really just sort of splashed a bit of colour on, and it wasn't quite working, so I sort of added a bit more colour, and then it started to come alive. So I'm actually quite pleased with that one. And again, sketching people around Ramsgate, sunbathing, etc. We had a really hot summer here, and this one again outside on the balcony of a particular pub, sort of looking back towards where I live actually, and all the sort of building work in the background of new apartments on the seafront. And this again, using all manner of pens, really going to town. Some of the slightly thicker Posca pens that have a slightly thicker nib, and pencil crayons, Caran d'Ache pencil crayons. Don't know if you can see that one there, and thicker Posca pens. Again, just still experimenting. I really wanted to free up the style, but have that sense of a really good composition as well. So I'm still experimenting. I'm still going through that process, and still finding out what I can do, what I'm comfortable with, I guess. And this one is a good case in point, where this was at Canterbury one particular afternoon, and I'd realised at the end of the sketch it was it was quite sort of brown heavy. I was using quite a lot of these Tombow ABT pens. It's a strange name, but I've had these in my collection for quite a while, and never really sort of used them. I've used them in commissioned illustration pieces, and they've come in useful occasionally. But so they have a brush pen on the end, and they have a shorter kind of piece on the other end. So they're very useful to lay down blocks of colour or different sort of shades of things on the rooftops, etc. So that's a good example of putting down, I think that was that sort of peach colour of a Posca pen, the thicker one, just to get that block in there for the house, and then other bits for the Tombow pen, just to highlight the darker bits of the windows and the darker where the sort of roof sort of overhangs. So again, I was sort of finding my way through. I put a little film together for this particular post as well, and that was something else that I wanted to experiment with, not just the artwork that I was producing, but also I'd noticed other followers who were kind of putting together and presenting their artwork in a different way. So I really wanted to up my game by doing the same thing. It's all very well to have a nice drawing at the end of it, but I've got so many followers that ask, and quite rightly so, the whole process of it, and do you sort of sketch before you commit to lines on paper? What sort of pens do you use? How long does it take you? How do you settle on a particular composition or a particular spot? How long does it take you in total to draw something like that? So all of these questions are really best sort of put into even if it's a 1-minute film, to put into a reel. And it's really adding another string to your bow in terms of putting together a video, a short film, where you're in charge of the editing and you can put a little bit of music over the top, a soundtrack. And so that's what I've started over the past couple of months getting into as well. Because the whole process of Instagram is very visual, and people like to see, on the whole, people don't mind seeing artwork presented in a certain way, but also in a visual sense, in a moving image way. You know, if it's very playful, and also it adds to that element that I love of the educational side of things. If I'm in a particular spot in London or Canterbury or wherever I am, and I give a little bit of history about that particular spot that I'm drawing and why I'm drawing it. So this one was a speeded up sort of time-lapse thing, just as an experiment that I did back here in the flat, just of Tower Bridge. Most people know Tower Bridge. They know the look of it, the shape of it. They've seen, if they know London very well, or if they've been to it a number of times, they know Tower Bridge from pretty much every angle. It's very historic. It's a very famous part of London. So I thought it would be an ideal building to sketch. So I was working from a photo, and again from comments from Instagram, that a lot of people were sort of asking, and I never really realised that they hadn't seen me sketch something from scratch, from the blank page to the finished product. So this one took about an hour, and I filmed it as I am doing now on my phone, to document it, and then just kind of speeded it up through a time-lapse app that I have on the phone. So it's a very simple way of, on a rostrum sort of tripod thing that I have here, that I'm using now, just to document how I sketch and how I approach it, and the dot-to-dot methods to keep things sort of in line and keep the composition together and the tightness of it, and where I actually begin my sketch and where I end it. So the basic general approach to a sketch, and that was all in a minute. So I thought that would be quite a nice post on my site. And these, again, just really influenced by Jenny Adams, Ronky Ponk. You've probably heard of her. She's fantastic. She travels quite a lot, and she has a very loose style that I admire. Not dissimilar to mine. I think mine's quite a lot tighter, and I take a little bit longer. But she seems to have this ability to put down on the page less is more approach. And it's a fantastic way of sort of encapsulating what you see in front of you in half the time, basically. So taking different pens, different approaches, the ones I showed you before, the Liquitex pens, the Tombow pens. So these ones are in Deal, which is another seaside town just up the road from me. And again, just really just having some fun. This one didn't quite work out. This is very sort of 1920s Art Deco style shelters for people to sort of sit in. This is just on the seafront there. So, you know, I'm experimenting, and some don't work out, some I don't post. So it's interesting for me to sort of talk about these here. And I didn't post this one because it's quite dark. I mean, I'm kind of having second thoughts about it now. It's an interesting composition. It's not quite tight enough for me, but I think the background altogether sort of went wrong. So I just experimented with painting. It probably should have been a brighter colour, just to sort of bring out some of the details. So it kind of works in some levels and it doesn't in others. But it was an interesting experiment nonetheless. And really just sort of going back to, at this point in the sketchbook, what I relied on and what I know best is to sit down or stand in front of a particular subject matter, get the composition down, and use the sort of two-colour method of darker colour for the foreground, slightly lighter colour in the same vein for the background, just to get that illusion of depth. and playing around with the background colours. No particular rhyme or reason to the colours or the direction of what I'm doing with those. It's just to make it more visually stimulating. So again, these were in deal. So what I wanted to do from the beginning of the sketchbook is now starting to come together. And this is just up the road, again in Deal, a really lovely pub called the King's Head. And all this is just a blue wash of colour before I came out, before I headed onto the, got on the train. And just one colour, just blue, because there was no, it was a close-up of this particular building. There was no foreground, background for me to play with. My intention was always to get all this detail of the flowers and the lovely sort of type on all the signs outside. So this one worked really well. And I think the algorithms on Instagram have changed slightly over the past couple of months. So some of the some of the likes that I was getting were quite a lot, shall we say, for these ones in particular. So that was great to see. This was just, I actually worked from a photo for this one. So I didn't post it because I do like to sit or stand and be in situ whenever I can. But this is just around the corner from me. So I'm just experimenting, just playing around with the colours. Again, another seaside town just up the road, about 30 minutes on the train from me, from Ramsgate. The usual kind of thing, the dark and the light for the foreground, background, just playing around. So I'm really starting to get into a rhythm now, and the same with this. I was particularly happy with this one because it took quite a while. Very detailed sketch of the very top of Canterbury Cathedral, and with this brush stroke again before I left the flat. So I think on this occasion I was painting up quite a few pages, just to sort of get me ready for a week or a weekend of heavy sketching. And again of Canterbury. So nature is always a difficult one for me, particularly because there's so many different variants of, and it depends on the season when you're sketching trees and bushes and things like that. So to actually have all these different pens at your disposal is great. And it's really, I think it's really about discipline. You can buy all these different materials and investigate how they should be used or how you want to use them, and really sort of experiment. But I think at the end of the day, for me personally, to get things down in the sketchbook on a particular on a particular page, it's all about finding those particular colours that work for you. And we're still dealing with foreground and background, so it's still the same approach, but we're using different pens. So we're really trying to tackle with so many different elements now, and this page is a good example of that. So I've painted up this sort of brushed work in the background here before I've left the flat, and that's the only starting point. And I knew I wanted to head to this particular spot because I'd been there previously before, probably a couple of weeks before this sketch. So I knew there was a particular spot where I could stand, and it was a really nice quiet sort of pathway. So there were certain pens that I knew I wanted to experiment with. And I think it worked pretty well. Looking back on it now, that I would have liked to have possibly put some brighter greens in there, or even some yellows. But on the whole, I'm pretty pleased with it. So again, just a light experiment of Ramsgate where I live. darkness and lightness for the foreground, background. And even just creating with a slightly thicker pen, just lines for the background. So it's really, it's not a block of colour. It's not even just a little block of, like a patch of colour, like that I sometimes do. It's creating lines to create that illusion of a lightness, of a tone. So it's just a different approach, and it gets you thinking about different sort of compositional aspects and things that you can do there. This one was at the gates of before you head into Canterbury Cathedral, and this took a while because it was on quite a busy thoroughfare where people were sort of walking past and queuing to actually get in the cathedral. So I did a little bit of the archway and then went for a coffee and then came back. So this was on a couple of stints, but I thought it was really interesting to have a block of orange, and then all the sort of fine line work of the Posca pen actually in a darker orange. So there isn't that much difference in between the background colour and what you see on the final line work as well. And I think it came over fairly successfully. But again, it's using the same methods. It's not sort of being too experimental, but it's doing something slightly different. St Augustine, so this is a beautiful Victorian church just down the road from me. Trying to use an interesting composition and combination of colours. So if you notice in the background where the detail shouldn't be as specific as the foreground, I'm really trying to encapsulate the sort of essential bits as you walk through this archway. So I'm only using an orange pen and then a little bit of this peach Posca pen. And what else did we use? I think one of the Tombow brush pens as well, just for this darker brown. But it's just highlighting certain bits. So it's what you leave out really in those moments that are more interesting. Less is more. And I know it's a phrase that people use quite often, but it really does, particularly in this sketchbook, is what I'm trying to put across. The block work that you'll see later in the sketchbook, the block work with these particular other pens that I'm using and experimenting with, is really doing a lot of the work for me. So this one got a lot of likes, and I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I'm very happy with it. And it was Great Smith Street. And I'd seen a photo because I follow a lot of photographers on Instagram as well. And I think it's really interesting because photographers are always, urban street photographers are always looking for those really dynamic compositions. And so am I when I'm out sketching. So it's always useful to look at accounts like that photographers that are really dealing with different compositions. And there was one in particular that caught my eye that was looking down Great Smith Street, looking back towards the Big Ben and Houses of Parliament, and this is just the corner of Westminster Abbey as well. So you're getting so many layers, and I thought it would be a good excuse to use the sort of three-coloured method of, you know, purple and then either orange or red and then the pink, like a very light pink, just to sort of push the boundaries a little bit. So it's not just two colours that you're using for the depth of field, it's actually three. So that was quite a successful one. And this one as well, I was really pleased. I just bought some new pens actually, this pink one in particular. I think it was this Liquitex one. So I really just sketched out, as I mentioned just before, about the shape of particular buildings, so that once you put that down on the blank page, you actually know fairly loosely where the shape of this building and this road sign is going to be and how it's going to turn out. So that's another very easy, quick way of determining where certain buildings are going to be before you actually start doing the finer line work. But this one worked out really well. The colours and the composition I was particularly pleased with. So this one, and again, when you're buying different pens, it makes your colour choices change slightly, and using a metallic blue pen on the top of this sort of yellow background, and the moving traffic. This is St Martin in the Field on the corner of Trafalgar Square. So there's so much traffic on the corner of here. It's in central London, it's in Trafalgar Square. There's buses and lorries that are blocking your view. So I was stood on this particular spot for quite a while, but it's quite nice to actually just encapsulate some of the traffic. You know, you don't always have to draw everything that is in front of you. And again, as I was discussing earlier about less is more. So you're just having a hint of what's in front of you. What's important is the actual building. But this was in homage to one of my favourite London paintings. It's called St Martin in the Fields, and it's by an artist called William Logsdale from the late 1800s. I mean, the original looks like a photograph. It's very atmospheric, it's slightly foggy, and apparently he was stationed for a couple of weeks in a vehicle on the curbside of Trafalgar Square with his feet covered in straw to protect him from the cold. So he had it a lot worse than I did, I think. But if you get a chance to look at the original, yeah, it's from William Logsdale, and it's called St Martin in the Fields. And there's a little girl in the foreground selling poppies, I think, from a tray. But it's a beautiful painting. So this one is in Somerset House, as you sort of walk through the archway, if you've ever been Somerset House, just further up at the Strand in London. And this is a statue of George III, if I'm getting this right, in the grounds. And it's meant to depict the king as Neptune or Father Thames. And apparently Queen Charlotte, his wife, was not impressed. It's such a curious figure. And it's only when you look at these things that, you know, the amusing stories, that the history arises. So that's another thing about, you know, you're not just sketching something interesting, you're actually documenting it in your own style. And you're finding interesting things that maybe not every tourist or not everyone knows about the city that you're in. So I find that, you know, to do the research before you head out, I find it really interesting. And St Pancras Hotel, St Pancras Renaissance Hotel, I think, to give its full title, Grade 1 listed building from around about late 1800s, 1870s, I think. Another example of sheer madness. You know, the local councillors at the time in the 1960s, it was actually due for demolition, but saved after a campaign led by the poet Sir John Betjeman. So this is now a luxury hotel with about 250 rooms. But this was on the busy high street, and this took another one that took a while to document. I think I went away for a coffee and just a little bit of a break, and then came back. Because the noise on that high street is deafening, and you do get a lot of articulated lorries and buses and all kinds of traffic going past that blocks your view. So this one took a little bit longer than intended. And this one just up, actually, this is just opposite Euston Station. And again, this is a Grade 1 listed. It's St Pancras New Church in a Greek revival style. So these four pillars are made of terracotta. And I just thought it was a fascinating, and it's a very quiet space just off the main road. So I could just stand in one particular spot. This one actually took quite a while to put together. It was very difficult just to, the dimensions and the angle. I did think about doing a face-on approach, which would have taken half the time, but I sort of enjoyed the challenge, and it was really good when it started to come together. I had to start again a couple of times with the faces, so it's not perfect, as you can see. I'm showing my mistakes now, but it was trying to encapsulate the faces and the structure, so it wasn't easy, and there's quite a few mistakes in there. But I think if you look at the sketch overall, it sort of works. And I like the colour combination as well. So this is just along the embankment on the Thames. It's an original obelisk flanked by two sphinxes. The needle itself is roughly, I think, about 3,500 years old. And it's a curious story. It was bought back in the late 1800s to commemorate the British victory over Napoleon. So it's another example of something that, once you look into the research, it's actually quite surprising, and with this example, quite odd, as it bears no relation to the subject matter. I guess it's just another case, sadly, of the British taking whatever they wanted back then, which was very questionable. So the obelisk is kind of here. I was sort of sat on the base of that, looking back towards the Houses of Parliament. And this was typical. There was nobody there, and it was quite a long walk up, and I thought, okay, I can sit here and do this sketch and it won't take long. And as soon as I sat and got myself in position, some guy just sat here for quite a long time. But it was okay. He moved eventually. It was almost like he knew I was coming. So again, using these pens, the Tombow ones that I've talked a little bit about, and as I mentioned before, just getting this block just so you know pretty much where things are going to be, because it's quite a detailed drawing. Then using another colour slightly darker for the foreground, the grey, to put this sort of entrance to Bank Station in as well. And so this sort of filled up pretty much all the page with these pens before I started drawing into the finer poster pens. So this was a good example of saving a lot of time, because you're constantly, or certainly the way I approach my drawings in sketchbooks is that there's always sort of pinpoint areas, dot to dot method I call it, where I'm sort of marking out just with little dots where things should be. But if I'm kind of changing my approach a little bit by putting in these marker pens, then I know where a block of something should be, or thereabouts. There's obviously going to be room for manoeuvre, as there is with parts here, as you can see. But on the whole, it worked out quite nicely. And I was doing it a little bit with this one as well. This is just round the corner. This was a good example of when you do your research and you look on Google Street Maps, and it looks like a pretty good place to stand to get the ultimate view. And then when you turn up, because Google doesn't update every day or every week, that's impossible, the street maps. So when you actually get there, because it's central London, there's lots of roadworks, so it's very difficult to stand where you wanted to stand. So this one took a little bit of time, and workmen constantly moving around me, and me feeling like I had to get out of the way, and sometimes I had to. So that was a difficult one to put together, but I was really pleased with the outcome. I think the colour choices as well really worked. And this one as well in Covent Garden, this sort of floral street, and this backs onto the Royal Ballet School, and this curious kind of modern glass entrance from the sort of ballet school actually into the theatre. So it's a sort of a quick walkway through. So there's little curious things that you see all the time in central London that you notice, and it's only when you do the research that you realise actually what it is and what it means. This one's back in Ramsgate. This is just the view from my window, actually, looking out onto Warclose Square. Just a lazy afternoon, felt like putting something together. And this is just up the road. This one's actually, I worked up from a photograph that somebody sent me of a camper van just kind of parked there, yellow camper van. Made for a nice composition, nice sketch. This is back in London, British Museum. I hadn't been back for a while, so I'm just sort of sketching a couple of figures. Again, using the block sort of Liquitex pens. These colours in particular have come in really handy. This pink one's really nice, and the grey ones come in handy, I found, for sort of block work for particular buildings. And then putting a really bright colour over the top, so you have that difference. In Oxford for the weekend at the beginning of this year, so it was very cold. This sort of really encapsulates everything I wanted to get down on the page. You know, lots of detail and layers in terms of the structures. Bodleian Library and Radcliffe Camera. As I say, freezing cold weather, but it was a really good one, and lots of tourists on this corner as well, because it's on the corner of Cat Street and New College Lane, where the Bridge of Sighs is, if you've ever been to Oxford. So it's a lovely spot, and I really enjoyed that particular morning. Drawing people, I mean, I'm always fascinated just with people and what they wear and at certain times of year. So this is, you know, we're still in beginning of February in London, Trafalgar Square. So this bit took a little bit longer than I thought, but it was okay. I managed to find a fairly quiet spot, and then the sort of second half of it was me sort of playing around again with these thicker Liquitex pens, acrylic pens, and then the finer Posca pens, just to encapsulate people sort of walking past. And it's almost like a visual sort of time lapse. Instead of recording it, I'm actually recording it on the page. So I'm not thinking about the preciseness of it. I think the whole point is just to draw people and sort of find a particular person that stands in a particular spot for maybe only 10 seconds. So you get the essence of the outline, and then sometimes by that point they've moved on, so you sort of finish the rest of it from recollection, and they overlap, and it doesn't matter. It makes for a really nice sketch. Similar with this one as well, Tower Bridge from a couple of months ago. Again, it's still quite cold, and what you find with these new structures that are all around a big city, especially like London, is that the wind that kind of whips through these two buildings are quite tall. So the wind that was coming down this way was quite significant. But it was a good sketch. This one actually didn't take too long, funnily enough. It's quite detailed, but when you look at because this is in the foreground, Tower Bridge, and I've sketched this so many times, so I sort of knew, obviously I still had to look pretty hard to and observe to actually put it down on the page, but I'd sketched it quite a few times by this point, so I sort of knew more or less where to put the pen on the page. And this is back in Ramsgate. This colour combination worked out really well, actually, and I put another one into a short film, a reel, that you can see on my Instagram page. This is the Royal Yacht Club, and it's an amazing view. It's probably one of the better views of Ramsgate, actually, because you can see, if you sort of look further to the right, you can see all the boats in the harbour. And if you look this way, you see the sort of main road sort of swings round, and you can see all the different pubs and restaurants down there. But the colour combination, I don't often use this green because it's a slightly thicker pen, but it comes in handy when I'm doing the foregrounds. And this was a pole where all the rigging is for all the different sort of things that they have above the pub. And then the edge of the pub is just in a slightly lighter blue. And then an aqua green for the very sort of foreground. So I was trying to create 3 different colours. But then again, the Liquitex pens coming into play as well. So we've got about 5 different colours working there simultaneously, but it doesn't look like 5 colours. This is one of the more interesting ones in the book for me, So that was a really nice afternoon. This was back home. I think I went back for my brother's birthday, so it would have been mid-February, something like that. This was the local church in my hometown in Sutton-in-Ashfield, near Nottinghamshire. St Mary's Church, it's been there since the 1300s, I think. So, and again, people coming up to me and sort of chatting for a while, wondering what I'm up to. And it's just really nice to sort of have a conversation with people and trying to get something down on the page as well. This one was okay. It didn't quite work out for me. I think the sort of colour choice of the trees, even though the detail of the trees I was really happy with, but there was something about the composition as well. Probably should have included more of the church. But on the whole, it was a nice afternoon. Back in Ramsgate, the brasserie, which is a very strange building at the end of the harbour, and it was a very, as you can probably see from the sea there, it was a very sunny but windy afternoon, and I wanted to be quite immediate with the pen work, and there's certain bits that I've really enjoyed with the Liquitex pens again, just trying to get a little thin line here and then sort of overworked with finer detail. So there's certain elements that are working really well and certain splashes of colour where I'm not too concerned about the accuracy. And the waves, I mean, I went over this particular spot with so many different coloured pens, and I think I was on the point of losing the intensity of it, so I'm glad I stopped when I did, because sometimes that's the difficult part, isn't it? The Folkestone Mermaid. So this was a sculpture by Cornelia Parker in 2011. So it was conceived as sort of part homage to the Copenhagen's Little Mermaid, and as a means of engaging with the local community as well. So this piece was actually based on a local mother of two, Georgina Baker. So again, really just, you know, this didn't take very long at all, experimenting with the pens. So we're starting, you know, this is towards the end of the sketchbook now, so we're starting to get this really nice balance of the detailed line work, and then just the sort of carefree playfulness of the thicker marker pens, just to kind of create that balance. So at the beginning it wasn't quite working, particularly with these sort of pages, but with these ones you can tell the difference as we're going through. We're starting to sort of get quite particular. This was RAF Manston Museum from a couple of weeks ago. Very sort of light of touch. It worked out really well to not sort of go in too heavy with the line work, and just to put in some base colour at the beginning, and the yellow of the helicopter as well. And I was very tempted to, you know, the edges of the windows, or the edges and where the sort of tyre is for the wheel, just to go in with a heavier colour. But I left it alone, and I'm glad I did, because it worked out really well, and it didn't take too long either. It was one of those sketches that once you put down the base colour to create the shapes, as I mentioned before, everything else kind of fell into place. And it was the same with this one as well. This is the same museum back outside. And again, I documented it in a short film. So it was a really interesting afternoon. Didn't quite work out with the shadows there. I don't think I brought the right pen out with me. Normally I'm quite well equipped with a bag of pens that I take out, but I think this colour should have been slightly darker. But on the whole, I'm really really pleased with it. So this one I'm actually putting together. It will probably be a post coming up quite shortly. Blackfriar pub in Blackfriars in central London, and I've sketched this one so many times, and it's such a great pub. It's almost shaped like the Flatiron Building in New York, but I wanted to put this one together into a short film. Again, sort of documenting the fact that I sketched it over 10 years ago when I first joined Instagram, and really sort of showing the difference of styles and where the styles and everything has led over the years to this point. And as I say, it's such an interesting composition, such an interesting building, and putting it together in a short film or a reel is always, you know, it's just a different approach, and if it's something different, then that's great. And this one is a friend, Grenville, who lives just up the road from me, and he's got an amazing apartment, and the front view is actually a sea view, so that's spectacular. But this is what interested me most, looking back down. It's a very curious street. It's called Plains of Waterloo. Looking back down the street, so if you go down to the end and turn right, and I'm just up at the end there, my flat. So it's a really interesting mix of council estate buildings in the background, and then these sort of really smart, would have been back in the day, very, very smart Victorian buildings. The Roman Wall in London. So this, if you come out of Tower Hill Station and turn right and sort of walk through a hotel complex, and it kind of opens out, and the sort of largest piece remaining of the Roman Wall is still there for people to see, and it's free, and not many people know about it. I don't think many tourists know about it. And when I was doing this sketch, it took me about an hour or so. I didn't get disturbed very many times. There was a group of tourists doing a walking tour for the first part of it, but the rest of the time it was quite quiet and serene, actually. So that was a really nice one to document. And again, it's a different composition. It's a place in London that not many people know about. You're dealing with the historical context. So there's so many different boxes that are ticked just by one sketch, and that's what really interests me. And some cats, Starbuck and Boomer. Some British grey short hairs that my girlfriend has. So it was just a lovely afternoon. They have, from about 3 o'clock onwards, they sleep for an hour or so. So it was a nice opportunity to get the pens out and try and document them. And this was St George's Church in Ramsgate, just up the road from me. There was a sort of a recital going on one particular Friday evening, so I took the sketchbook along. And this was a page where I was actually testing out the marker pens, because we're getting to the end of the sketchbook now. So a lot of what you see here has nothing to do with the sketch that I eventually produced. I was just testing out the pens for previous sketches when I headed out. But it actually lent itself really nicely to the grey walls of the church. So that was a really nice evening, and it was really nice to sort of sit in a pew and document what was happening there. So there we are. So that's just the very last page where I'm testing out the pens, and you can see all the different sort of markers and things like that. And that's really the sort of end pages. That's what I use those for, just to test out the pens and see if they're working, and different colour combinations, whether I think it's going to work, you know, the foreground, background colours before I head out. So that is that. So that was sketchbook number 10. That's quite a long chat, but I think in terms of the development and the experimentation, there was quite a lot to talk through. So I hope you enjoyed it. So look out for sketchbook number 11. Hopefully it won't take quite as long as sketchbook number 10 and the previous ones. But I think that's been a really interesting talk through, and just to give you guys a flavour of where I'm at the moment. So check out the other ones on my YouTube channel, and hopefully hear or see from you very soon on future travels. Okay, thanks a lot.